The final verdict in the mediation room landed with the flat, dead sound of a stone dropped into a deep well. Chloe's face, which had been a mask of indignant fury for the past hour, simply crumbled. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Her mother gasped, and I just watched. I felt nothing but a profound and quiet stillness. It was over. The meticulously constructed plan I had set in motion thousands of miles away, in a sun-drenched hotel room that smelled of betrayal, had reached its calculated conclusion. She had thought I was a simple man, a stable but unexciting provider she could easily manipulate and discard. She never once considered that a simple man might value loyalty above all else, or that his response to its violation would be anything but simple. She thought my greatest asset was my salary. She was wrong. My greatest asset was my patience. My name is Alex. I'm an architect, and for the last 10 years, my life has been about structure, planning, and precision. I design buildings meant to stand for a century, and I apply the same meticulousness to my own life. When I met Chloe, I thought I was laying the foundation for our future. We dated for 3 years, a period I now see was less of a courtship and more of a long-term project proposal on her part. I was stable. I was reliable. I had a good career and a clear path forward. I was, in her mother's thinly veiled words, a sensible investment. I was too blinded by what I thought was love to see the transactional nature of it all. I saw her beauty, her vibrant energy, and I believed it complemented my quiet steadiness. I mistook her appetite for life as passion, not as the gaping maw of materialism it truly was. But let me start from the beginning, from the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation I thought was solid rock. We were married on a perfect Saturday in June. The wedding was exactly what Chloe had wanted, which is to say it was beyond our means, but I'd worked overtime for a year to pay for it. Her dress cost more than my first car. The reception was at a lavish country club I knew her mother, Eleanor, had selected to impress her circle of friends. Throughout the planning, I was the quiet, agreeable partner. I signed the checks. I nodded along to discussions of floral arrangements and ice sculptures. My only request was a simple one: that our honeymoon be somewhere quiet, somewhere we could truly connect after the chaos of the wedding. I pictured a secluded cabin, hiking trails, and quiet nights by a fire. Chloe, however, had other ideas. She wanted glamour. She wanted a 5-star, all-inclusive resort in the Caribbean, a place with infinity pools and poolside service, a place where she could take endless photos for her social media. "It's our honeymoon, Alex," she'd said, her voice laced with that particular tone of strained patience she used when she felt I was being deliberately obtuse. "It's supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience." Not camping, I relented, as I always did. I wanted her to be happy. So I booked the top-tier suite at the most exclusive resort on the island of St. Bart's, a place called Elysian Cove. The cost was astronomical, but seeing the genuine delight on her face when I showed her the reservation seemed worth it. It was an investment in our shared happiness, or so I told myself. We arrived on a Monday. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of salt and hibiscus. The resort was undeniably beautiful, a paradise of white sand, turquoise water, and perfectly manicured luxury. Chloe was in her element. She spent the first day documenting everything: the champagne waiting in our suite, the view from our balcony, the designer swimwear she'd bought. She posed, pouted, and curated our perfect honeymoon for her online audience. I tried to engage with her, to pull her into the moment with me, but she was always looking at our experience through the lens of her phone. "Just a second, honey. The lighting is perfect," she'd say, holding a cocktail at arm's length to capture the sunset in the background. I was a prop in her story, the silent, smiling husband in the corner of the frame. The first sign of real trouble came on the third day. I had woken up early, as I always do, and gone for a run along the beach. When I returned to the suite, Chloe was still asleep. Her phone was on the nightstand, buzzing insistently. It was a habit of hers to leave its screen up. A message preview flashed across the lock screen. It was from a name I didn't recognize, Julian. The message was simple and devastating. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait for round 2. He's such a fool, I stood there, sweat from my run cooling on my skin, and read it again. And again. The words didn't seem real. They were like a line from a bad movie. He's such a fool. The sentence echoed in the silent room. I looked at Chloe, sleeping peacefully, her face a perfect, serene mask. The woman I had married, the woman I had promised my life to just 5 days earlier, was a stranger. The air in my lungs felt thick and heavy, like concrete. My first instinct was a hot, white flash of pure rage. I wanted to wake her up, to scream, to throw the phone against the wall. I wanted to see her face when the lie was stripped away. But then something else took over. It was the architect in me, the planner, the man who deals not in emotion but in structure, in load-bearing walls and stress points. An emotional outburst was a demolition. It was messy, unpredictable, and ultimately unproductive. What I needed was not a demolition, but a controlled, precise dismantling. I took a deep, shuddering breath and walked out onto the balcony, closing the glass door silently behind me. The sun was climbing higher, casting a brilliant, almost painful light on the water. The world looked beautiful, vibrant, and utterly fake. My mind, which had been a storm of hurt and anger, began to clear. I started thinking in steps, in phases. Phase 1. Confirmation and information. I needed to know who Julian was. I needed more than one text message. I needed irrefutable proof. I took out my own phone. My hands were shaking, but my fingers were steady as I typed. I opened a browser and searched the resort's name along with the social media tags Chloe had been using. It didn't take long. Her posts were public, a breadcrumb trail of vanity. I scrolled through photos tagged at Elysian Cove from the last few days. And there he was, Julian. He was in the background of one of the resort's promotional photos from their beach party the night before. He was handsome in a slick, predictable way, with a salesman's smile and an expensive watch. He was standing with a group of men, and a few feet away, I could see the back of Chloe's head. She was wearing the same dress she'd worn to dinner with me. My stomach clenched. We had gone to dinner. She had complained of a headache around 10 o'clock and said she was going back to the room to lie down. I'd stayed at the bar for another hour, thinking she just needed some rest. She hadn't gone to the room. She had gone to him. The timeline clicked into place with sickening precision. The lie was not just a single act. It was a constructed narrative. She had planned it. I went back inside. Chloe was still asleep. I looked at her phone again. I knew her passcode. She had given it to me once to answer a call when her hands were full. It was her birthday. Predictable. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs. I unlocked it. The message thread with Julian was right there. I started reading. It was all there. They had met a month ago at a charity gala her mother had dragged her to. He was some kind of wealth manager boasting about his portfolio and his yacht. The messages were a nauseating mix of flirtation and logistics. They had planned this. He had booked his trip to St. Bart's to coincide with our honeymoon. This wasn't a spontaneous mistake fueled by alcohol. This was a premeditated act of contempt. I scrolled through pages of their conversations, feeling a cold detachment settle over me. I took my own phone and began to photograph every screen, every message, every picture they had exchanged. I documented it all with the same dispassionate focus I would use to photograph a building's structural flaws. The evidence was crucial. Emotion would fade, but this digital record was permanent. It was the foundation of whatever came next. After I had captured everything, I placed her phone back on the nightstand, exactly as I had found it. I went into the bathroom and turned on the shower, the noise covering the sound of my call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Mark. Mark wasn't just my lawyer. He was my oldest friend. We had known each other since we were kids. He was the calmest, most rational person I knew. He answered on the second ring, his voice still thick with sleep. Alex? It's 4 a.m. here. Is everything okay? How's the honeymoon? I kept my own voice low and steady. Mark, I need your professional advice. Not your friend advice, not right now. I need the lawyer. The sleepiness vanished from his voice. What's wrong? Chloe is cheating on me, I said. The words sounded foreign, clinical. Here, on our honeymoon, I have proof. Photographic evidence of text messages. It was planned. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. When he finally spoke, his tone was all business. Okay, Alex, listen to me very carefully. Do not confront her. Do not let her know that you know. Do you understand? Say nothing. Act normal. Act normal. I whispered, looking at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I looked hollowed out. How am I supposed to do that? You are an architect. You are a planner. This is now a project. The objective is to exit this situation with maximum efficiency and minimal damage to you. Your feelings are valid, but they are a liability right now. We need to be strategic. First, assets. Did you sign a prenuptial agreement? I thought back to the whirlwind of wedding planning. Yes, Chloe's mother insisted on it. She said it was to protect Chloe. I didn't care, so I just signed it. I didn't have much to protect. I thought, Alex, Mark said slowly, and I could hear the gears turning in his legal mind. Your trust. Is it mentioned in the prenup? The trust. My grandfather had set it up years ago. It was a substantial portfolio of commercial real estate and investments, managed by a firm. I was the sole beneficiary, but the assets were legally owned by the trust itself, not me. I had never told Chloe the full extent of it. I wanted someone to love me for who I was, not for a number in a bank account. I lived a comfortable but modest life off my own salary. The trust was my future, my security, something I had never felt the need to flaunt. No, I said. My personal income, the house, my savings account are all listed. The trust is a separate legal entity. It's not in my name, technically. I'm the beneficiary. I never mentioned it to her. A low whistle came down the phone line. Okay, that's good. That's very good. Her mother's arrogance just handed you a shield of pure titanium. What about the house? The down payment came from the trust, I said. A disbursement for a primary residence. The deed is in my name, but the trust has a lien on it for the full amount of the down payment. Alex, you magnificent, careful bastard, Mark said, and for the first time a bit of the friend came through. Okay, here's what you do. Keep gathering evidence. Be the boring, predictable husband she thinks you are. Let her get comfortable. Let her get arrogant. Document every single thing she buys with your credit card. We're going to establish a pattern of behavior. Don't cut her off yet. Let her run up the bill. It's all evidence of her character and expectations. When are you due to fly back? Saturday, I said. For more days, he repeated. You can do this, Alex. Be an actor. This is the most important performance of your life. Call me every day. We'll make a plan. We're going to dismantle this piece by piece. I hung up the phone and stared at the shower wall. The water was hot, but I felt frozen. Mark was right. This was a project. My marriage was no longer a home. It was a structure slated for demolition, and I was going to be the one drawing up the plans. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Chloe was awake, stretching languidly in the bed. She smiled at me, a bright, false smile that didn't reach her eyes. Morning, sleepyhead. You were gone for a while. Just a long run on the beach, I said, my voice even. It was surprisingly easy to lie. The sunrise was beautiful. I didn't say I had watched it from the balcony, my world collapsing in silence. You and your running, she said with a little laugh, dismissing my passion as a quaint little quirk. I was thinking we could go to that fancy boutique in town today. I saw a gorgeous Dior bag yesterday. I thought of the messages on her phone, of Julian, of the phrase, he's such a fool. I looked at her, at this beautiful stranger in my bed, and I nodded. Of course, I said. Whatever you want. Her smile widened. She thought my compliance was a sign of devotion. It was, in fact, the beginning of her end. The next 4 days were the longest of my life. I played the part of the devoted, slightly dull new husband flawlessly. I paid for the absurdly expensive handbag. I sat through long, leisurely lunches where she spent most of the time on her phone, smiling at the screen. I knew now who she was texting. I would watch her, and a cold, clinical curiosity would rise in me. How could a person be so brazen? Did she feel no guilt? No, I realized. She felt entitled. She believed she deserved both my stability and his excitement. In her mind, she was the prize and we were simply competing bidders. I continued my evidence gathering with quiet efficiency. I enabled a location sharing feature on our family cloud account under the guise of finding my phone if I lose it, which she agreed to with a distracted wave. Now I could see where she was in real time. Twice she told me she was going to the spa. Twice the little blue dot on my map showed her at a different resort on the other side of the island, Julian's resort. I took screenshots. I downloaded our credit card statements every evening. The charges painted a vivid picture. Lunches for two at expensive restaurants I had not been to, charges from a hotel gift shop that was not ours. She was buying him gifts with my money. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Each night, I would call Mark from the balcony while she showered. We spoke in low voices, building our case. He had me transfer the majority of my personal savings into a new account in my name only. He advised me to call the credit card companies and report my card stolen, but to schedule the cancellation for 10 a.m. on Saturday, the day of our departure. Our flight was at 3 p.m. Why not cancel them now? I had asked. Let her have one last big shopping spree on Friday, Mark said, his voice grim. Let her hang herself with the rope she thinks is a diamond necklace. We want her to be completely confident, completely oblivious. Right up until the last possible moment on Friday, she was in high spirits. She suggested we have a romantic final dinner at the most expensive restaurant at the resort. Throughout the meal, she talked about the future. She talked about renovating the kitchen, about buying a new car, a Mercedes. She talked about it all as if it were a certainty, as if my resources were hers to command indefinitely. She held my hand across the table, her rings sparkling in the candlelight. Her touch felt like ice. I'm so happy, Alex, she said, her eyes shimmering with what I now knew were manufactured tears. This is the perfect start to our perfect life. To our perfect life, I echoed, raising my glass. My face was a placid mask. Inside, I was counting down the hours. Saturday morning arrived, bright and clear. The end was in sight. Chloe was buzzing with energy, packing her new purchases into an extra suitcase she had bought. Our flight was in the afternoon, so we had a few hours left. I'm just going to pop down to the lobby shops one last time, she announced. I saw a pair of sunglasses that I just have to have. Okay, I said. I'll finish packing up here and meet you in the lobby for checkout at noon. She kissed my cheek. A quick, careless gesture, and left. The moment the door clicked shut, my plan went into its final motion. I had already packed my single suitcase the night before. I took my wallet, my passport, and my phone. I walked over to the desk and took a piece of the hotel's expensive stationery. My hand was perfectly steady as I wrote the note. It was short. Chloe, I know everything. About Julian. About the messages. About the lies. The person I married doesn't exist. By the time you read this, your credit cards will be declined and your ticket for flight AA415 will be cancelled. I have left you 200 euros on the table for a taxi. I suggest you use it to get to your country's embassy. They can assist you with your travel arrangements. Goodbye, Alex. I placed the note in the center of the perfectly made bed. I put 450 euro notes beside it. Then I walked out of the suite and closed the door behind me without a single backward glance. I went to the front desk and checked out, settling the massive bill with my debit card. I took a taxi to the airport, changed my flight to an earlier one that was leaving in an hour, and sat at the gate. My phone buzzed at exactly 10:01 a.m. It was an email from the credit card company, confirming my cards had been canceled. As I sat on the plane, waiting for takeoff, I allowed myself a single moment to feel the weight of it all. It wasn't triumph. It was a deep, aching sadness. A mourning for the future I thought I was building. But beneath the sadness was a foundation of solid, unshakable resolve. I had been betrayed, but I had not allowed myself to be destroyed. I had responded to chaos with order. I had protected myself. The plane accelerated down the runway, and as it lifted into the sky, I looked out the window at the impossibly blue water below. I was leaving the wreckage behind. The next few days were a blur of logistics. I landed, went home to a house that felt cavernously empty, and changed the locks. I sent Mark copies of all the evidence I had collected. He filed for divorce on my behalf on Monday morning, citing infidelity. The petition was served to an empty house. 2 days later, the calls started. First, it was Chloe from a number I didn't recognize. Her voice was a hysterical shriek. "Alex, what did you do? My cards aren't working. My ticket was canceled. I'm stuck here. You can't just leave me." I listened without saying a word. "Are you there? Alex, answer me. You monster. How could you do this to me?" "I believe my note was self-explanatory," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Contact your mother. I'm sure she'll wire you the money for a flight." I hung up and blocked the number. Next came her mother, Eleanor. Her tone was a venomous mix of outrage and disbelief. "I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, Alex, but you will regret this. Stranding my daughter in a foreign country? We will take you for everything you have. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "On the contrary, Eleanor," I said calmly, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I suggest you retain a very good lawyer. You're going to need 1 inch." I hung up on her. 2. Took Chloe 4 days to get home. Her parents had to pay for a last-minute, full-fare ticket in business class, a fact Eleanor screamed at me in a voicemail. When Chloe finally arrived at the house, she found the locks changed. The police she called informed her that since her name wasn't on the deed, it was a civil matter and they could do nothing. She was forced to go home to her parents, a humiliation I knew would sting her more than anything else. The war had begun. Their first move was a letter from a high-priced lawyer demanding immediate access to the house, reinstatement of her credit cards, and a monthly spousal support payment that was more than my take-home pay. It also laid claim to 50% of all assets, including my business holdings, a phrase that told me they had somehow gotten wind of the trust and were coming for it. Mark just laughed when I read it to him. "It's a fantasy document," he said. "Let them live in their fantasy world a little longer. The fall will be that much harder." We responded with a simple, factual letter from Mark, outlining our position. The marriage was being dissolved due to documented infidelity. We offered her nothing but her personal belongings, which she could retrieve at a time designated by us, with a police escort present to keep the peace. The prenuptial agreement she signed was attached as Exhibit A. The evidence of her affair, the text messages, the location tracking screenshots, the credit card statements showing her trysts with Julian, was attached as Exhibit B. Their response was to demand a formal mediation. They were hoping to intimidate me in person, to use emotion and accusation to bully me into a settlement. They had no idea I had left all my emotion back on that island. All I had left was the cold, hard calculus of the truth. The day of the mediation arrived. I wore a simple gray suit, the kind of thing I wore for a client presentation. I felt calm, centered. Mark and I arrived at the conference room first. A few minutes later, Chloe, her mother, and their lawyers swept in. Chloe looked pale and tired beneath a heavy layer of makeup. The entitled confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, simmering rage. Eleanor looked at me as if I were something she'd scraped off her shoe. Their lawyer, a slick man named Peterson, began with a blustering speech about my unconscionable and cruel behavior. He spoke of Chloe's emotional distress, of her public humiliation. He painted me as a controlling, vindictive monster. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, and let him talk. When he was finished, he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a settlement demand. It was even more outrageous than the first one. They wanted the house, half the value of the trust, which they had wildly overestimated, lifetime alimony, and a formal apology. I looked at the paper, then at Chloe. "No," I said. "No," Peterson sputtered. "My client is entitled to a share of the marital assets." Mark leaned forward, placing a single, thin folder on the table. "Let's talk about marital assets," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. First, the prenuptial agreement which your client and her mother insisted upon, and which your client signed. It clearly stipulates that in the event of a dissolution of marriage due to infidelity, all claims to spousal support are forfeited. We have, as you know from Exhibit B, irrefutable proof of said infidelity. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Second, the house. The house was purchased with a down payment of $400,000. That money was a legal disbursement from a private family trust, which holds a primary lien on the property. The house is not an asset. It is a debt to the trust. If sold, the trust gets its money back first. There is no equity. Your client has no claim. Chloe's mouth fell open. Eleanor shot her a furious look. What is he talking about? What trust? And that brings us to the third point, Mark continued, his voice like surgical steel. The trust itself. The business holdings you refer to. The trust is a separate legal entity, established by my client's grandfather. It is not a personal asset of my client. He is the beneficiary, not the owner. It is not and never was a marital asset. The prenup is very clear on what constitutes marital property. Only assets acquired through direct income during the marriage. Given that the marriage lasted less than 3 months, that amount is negligible. Peterson's face had gone slack. He was looking at the prenup, reading the fine print for what was likely the first time. He had clearly taken the case assuming I was just some salaried architect he could steamroll. He had been misled by his own client's arrogance. This is ridiculous, Eleanor shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. He tricked us. He hid his wealth. He hid nothing, Mark countered smoothly. He lived a modest life on the salary he earned. He wasn't obligated to disclose the nature of his family inheritance, especially to people who made it clear from the outset that money was their primary concern. You were the ones who insisted on the prenup to protect your daughter from a man you saw as her financial inferior. As it turns out, you protected him from her instead. The irony is, I must admit, quite delicious. Chloe finally found her voice. It was shaking with a desperate, pleading rage. Alex, look at me. How can you do this? After everything. I loved you. I met her gaze for the first time. The stillness inside me held. No, you didn't, I said, and my voice was not angry or hurt, just factual. You loved the idea of me. You loved my stability. You loved my income. You loved the house. But you never respected me. The proof is in the messages you sent to Julian. You called me a fool while spending my money to meet your lover on our honeymoon. That is not love. That is contempt. I pushed a final document across the table. This is our final offer. Chloe will walk away with her personal belongings and the debts she accrued on her own credit cards. We will not pursue her for the money she spent on her affair, as a gesture of goodwill. Sign it and we can all move on with our lives. Refuse and we will see you in court, where all of this evidence will become a matter of public record. That was the moment. The final, load-bearing pillar of her delusion was removed. The entire structure of her world came crashing down. Her lawyer, Peterson, read our offer and then looked at her. Sign it, Chloe, he said, his voice low and defeated. They have you. There's nothing I can do, and that is when she broke. A raw, guttural sob escaped her lips. It wasn't a sound of sadness or remorse. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated loss. The sound of a gambler who had pushed all her chips onto one number and watched the ball land on another. Her mother, Eleanor, started yelling, a stream of invective directed at me, at Mark, at her own daughter. It was a symphony of avarice and failure. I stood up. Mark stood with me. We had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a successful demolition. Necessary. Tidy. But in the end, all that was left was an empty space. We'll leave you to discuss it, Mark said to Peterson. We walked out of the conference room, leaving the sounds of Chloe's weeping and Eleanor's screaming behind us. We didn't look back. Later that afternoon, Mark called to tell me they had signed. It was officially over. I went home to the quiet house. For a moment, I saw ghosts in every room. The ghost of a life I had tried to build. The ghost of a woman who never really existed. I walked into my home office and took down the large, framed wedding photograph from the wall. I looked at the smiling faces of the two strangers in the picture, then I carried it out to the garage and placed it in a trash can. I returned to the office and unrolled a set of blueprints on my desk. It was for a project I'd been designing in my spare time, a small, modern, self-sufficient home for one. A house with clean lines, honest materials, and a foundation built on solid ground. I picked up a pencil and began to draw. The quiet scratching sound was the only noise in the house. It was the sound of a new beginning. I had learned a brutal lesson. Some structures are flawed from the very beginning. They can't be fixed. They have to be torn down so you can build again, stronger and smarter than before. My loyalty had been my weakness, but my methodical nature had become my salvation. She had underestimated me, and in the end, that was a mistake that cost her everything. I had lost a marriage, but I had reclaimed my life. And in the quiet solitude of my empty house, that felt like a fair trade.